Welcome back to Her Secret Diaries. This is the place where quiet lives speak the loudest, where ordinary moments hold extraordinary truths, and where the stories people carry for years finally find a voice. If you believe that memories matter, that family is complicated, and that sometimes the smallest decisions change everything, then you're in the right place. Sit with me for a moment. Because today's story is about a house, a daughter, and a decision that could not be undone. I remember the exact moment my daughter told me the house was too big for me. She said it the way people say things they believe are kind. Soft voice. Careful smile. Hands folded together like she was delivering good news instead of something that felt like the ground shifting under my feet. We were sitting at the kitchen table where she had done her homework as a child. The same table where her father once spilled coffee every morning because he always insisted on reading the newspaper and drinking at the same time. The same table where birthday cakes had been placed and candles blown out. I had just poured tea. She didn't drink hers. "Mom," she said, glancing around the kitchen, "this house is just too big for you now." At first I thought she meant something simple. Maybe the stairs. Maybe the yard. Maybe she was worried about me climbing the ladder to clean the gutters. So I smiled. "I've managed it for 40 years, I told her. But she shook her head slowly. "That was different. Dad was here then. And we were kids. Now it's just you. Just you." Those two words echoed through the kitchen like the tick of the clock on the wall. Just you. I looked around the room. The cabinets still had the small scratch marks from when she learned how to ride a tricycle in the house during a rainy winter. The refrigerator still had the dent from the time my son slammed it with a soccer ball. The window above the sink had the faint outline where holiday decorations used to hang every December. This house wasn't just a house. It was a life. "I like the quiet," I said. She sighed in that way adult children sigh when they think their parents are being stubborn. "It's not about liking it," she said gently. "It's about what's practical." Practical. That word felt colder than the tea between my hands. Over the next few weeks, she mentioned it again and again. At first casually, then more seriously. Every visit included a comment about the stairs, the yard, the empty bedrooms. "Mom, when was the last time you even went into the guest room? Mom, you shouldn't be mowing a lawn this big. Mom, what if you fall?" The last one was the one that lingered. What if you fall? It sounded like concern. And maybe some of it was. But it also sounded like a decision already made somewhere in her mind. One afternoon she arrived with a folder. She placed it on the kitchen table. Inside were brochures for small apartments. Bright pictures of smiling older people standing on balconies with tiny potted plants. "Look," she said, turning the pages like she was showing me vacation options. "These places are perfect. No stairs, no yard work. Close to everything." I flipped through the pages quietly. Every apartment looked the same. Clean, small, temporary. Where would I put the piano? I asked. She blinked. "You still have that old thing." I didn't answer. Because the piano wasn't just an old thing. Her father had bought it for me on our 10th anniversary. He had carried it into the living room himself with 2 friends and a lot of stubborn pride. Our daughter had learned her first song on it, "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." She had been 6. The same age her own daughter was now. "I'm not moving," I said softly. She didn't argue that day. But the idea had been planted, and once something is planted, it has a way of growing. A month later, she brought it up again. This time she had numbers. She showed me property values, maintenance costs, insurance. "Do you realize how much money this house is worth now?" she asked. I shrugged. "I never planned to sell it. But think about what you could do with that money." The way she said it made it sound like the house was a lottery ticket I was refusing to cash. "What would I do with it?" I asked. "Travel, relax, not worry about repairs." I smiled. "I've never wanted to travel," I said. "Everything I love is right here." She looked around the room again, and I could see it in her eyes. She didn't see the same house I did. Where I saw memories, she saw empty space. Where I saw history, she saw square footage. "Mom," she said slowly, "you're thinking emotionally." I almost laughed. Of course I was thinking emotionally. A home isn't math. It's time. It's laughter in hallways. It's doors slammed during teenage arguments. It's quiet mornings and loud holidays and the sound of someone you love walking across the floor late at night. How do you measure that? But she had already measured it. In dollars? A few weeks passed quietly. Then one Saturday morning she arrived earlier than usual. She looked nervous. "Mom," she said, sitting down quickly, "I did something." That sentence has a way of making your stomach tighten. "What did you do?" I asked. She hesitated. Then she said it. "I spoke to a real estate agent." I stared at her. "You what?" "Just to get information," she said quickly. "Nothing official." But the next week the real estate agent came to the house. He walked through every room. He opened closets. He looked at the backyard. He talked about the market, about buyers, about how quickly houses like this sold. I followed him around like a ghost, watching someone measure my life. "This place is a gold mine," he said cheerfully. I didn't feel rich. I felt like something was being taken apart, piece by piece. After he left, my daughter looked excited. "Did you hear him?" she said. This could change everything. But everything was exactly what I didn't want changed. I told her again that I wasn't ready. She nodded. But she looked disappointed. And that disappointment slowly turned into pressure. Phone calls, conversations, little comments that made staying feel selfish. "Mom, I'm just trying to help." "Mom, you can't hold on to things forever." "Mom, you need to think about the future." The future. No one ever talks about the past when they're trying to take something away. Months passed like that. And then one afternoon, everything changed. I came home from the grocery store and saw a sign on the lawn. A bright red sign. "For sale." At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the agent had mixed up the address. But then my daughter's car pulled into the driveway. She stepped out looking nervous. "What is that?" I asked quietly. She took a deep breath. "I listed the house." The words didn't make sense. "You can't list the house," I said. "Yes, I can," she replied. "How?" "You signed the paperwork last month when we met with the agent." I tried to remember. There had been papers. She had said they were for information. She had said they were just so the agent could prepare things. "You told me that wasn't a listing agreement?" I said slowly. She looked away. "It's what needed to happen." Needed. Another cold word. "I didn't agree to sell my home," I said. "Mom, you just didn't understand the process." The process. I looked at the house behind me. 40 years of living. And somehow it had become a process. The first showing happened 3 days later. Strangers walked through the rooms. They opened my cabinets. They stood in the living room, whispering to each other about renovations. I stood in the backyard pretending to pull weeds. A week later, there was an offer. Then another. My daughter was thrilled. "This is incredible," she said. "We're getting above asking price." I hadn't said yes. But the wheels were already turning. Contracts, phone calls, deadlines. One evening she sat across from me again, at the same kitchen table. "Mom," she said gently, "the house is sold." The words landed like stones. "You can't sell something that isn't yours," I whispered. But somehow she had. Legally, technically. Because I had trusted her. The closing was scheduled for the end of the month. I spent those weeks walking through the house slowly. Room by room. Touching walls. Opening drawers. Remembering the bedroom where my husband and I once stayed up all night talking about the future. The hallway where my children measured their height, with pencil marks on the wall. The living room where Christmas mornings exploded with wrapping paper and laughter. Each memory felt like a photograph being taken down from a wall. On the last night before the closing, I sat at the piano. My fingers moved across the keys slowly. The same song my daughter had learned first. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. I wondered if she even remembered. The next morning she arrived with boxers. Ready? She asked. No, but the house wasn't mine anymore. Or so she believed. Because what she didn't know was that I had made one quiet decision of my own. And by the time she realized what it meant, the house she thought she sold was never truly hers to sell at all. The first thing you learn after living in a house for 40 years is that walls remember things. Not literally, of course. They don't whisper or creak out secrets in the middle of the night. But when you run your hand across them, when you stand in a quiet hallway with afternoon light spilling through the windows, you feel something that doesn't exist in new places. History. That morning, after my daughter told me the house was sold, I walked slowly through each room again. Not because I believed I could stop what had already happened, but because I needed to say goodbye in my own way. The living room smelled faintly like lemon polish. I had cleaned the coffee table the night before, even though no one was coming to visit. Old habits are difficult to break, especially the ones that make a house feel alive. The couch sat where it always had, slightly angled, toward the window. My husband used to sit there every evening after work, loosening his tie and asking what was for dinner. Sometimes he would fall asleep before I even answered. I could still see him there. The sunlight landed in the exact same spot on the floor where our daughter once built a blanket fort during a snowstorm when she was 7. She had dragged every pillow in the house into that living room and declared it a castle. She made me crawl inside. For 3 hours, we pretended the floor was lava. It seemed impossible that someone else would soon walk into that same room and see nothing but square footage. I moved to the hallway next. The pencil marks were still on the wall. I had thought about painting over them many times. Every year when I did spring cleaning, I would pause in front of those lines. Each one had a date beside it. My daughter's height at 6. 7.8. My son's growth spurts marked in quick jumps every summer. But I never painted over them, because every mark was proof that life had happened here. Now strangers would probably cover them in a single afternoon. New paint, fresh walls, history erased with a roller brush. I continued walking until I reached the kitchen again. The kitchen had always been the heart of the house. The window above the sink looked out into the backyard, where a maple tree stood tall and stubborn. My husband planted it the year our daughter was born. It was barely taller than a broomstick then. Now it stretched above the roofline, branches wide and steady like it had been guarding the house for decades. I wondered if the new owners would keep it or cut it down. The thought made my chest tighten. The back door creaked open behind me. My daughter stepped inside, carrying another box. "You should start packing things you want to keep," she said gently. "The movers come in a week. 40 years reduced to 7 days. I'm working on it," I said. She set the box on the table and looked around the kitchen. "You know," she said, "this is actually going to be good for you." I didn't respond. She continued talking anyway. "That apartment I showed you has a really nice balcony, and there's a park just down the street. You'll meet people your age, people my age." The phrase felt like a label someone sticks on a storage box. Fragile, old, handle with care. "I already know people," I said quietly. She crossed her arms. "Mom, you hardly leave the house." "I leave when I need to." "That's the point," she replied. "You shouldn't only leave when you need to. You should enjoy life." I looked at her carefully. There was sincerity in her eyes. But there was something else too. Impatience. As if my life had become an inconvenience, she was trying to organize. "I enjoy my life," I said. She sighed. "You enjoy memories." Maybe she was right. But memories were the only things that stay when everything else moves on. Later that afternoon she left. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the sound of her car disappeared down the street. Eventually I stood up and walked toward the small wooden cabinet near the hallway. It was an old cabinet with a stubborn drawer that always stuck halfway. Inside, it were the things people rarely think about until they need them. Birth certificates, insurance papers, tax documents, in one thin folder that had been there for years. I pulled the folder out slowly. Inside was a document with a date from almost 15 years earlier. The day my husband died. That day had arrived quietly, just like most terrible days do. There had been no warning, no dramatic final speech. Just a phone call from the hospital telling me I needed to come immediately. By the time I arrived, the machines were already silent. The doctor spoke softly. My daughter cried. My son stared at the floor. And I held my husband's hand for a long time, even though it was already cold. A week later, I sat in a lawyer's office. My husband had always been careful about paperwork. He believed in planning for things people didn't want to think about. Your husband made one unusual decision, the lawyer told me that day. He slid a document across the desk. Unusual how? I asked. He placed the house in a trust. I didn't know much about trusts then. I barely know much about them now. But the lawyer explained slowly. The house technically belonged to the trust, not directly to me, and there were specific instructions written by my husband himself. One of those instructions was simple. The house could never be sold without approval from the trust's secondary beneficiary. Who is that? I asked. The lawyer looked at the paper again. You, he said, and I asked. There's another name listed. I leaned forward. My granddaughter. At the time she was only a baby, too young to walk, too young to speak. But my husband had believed something important. That the house should remain part of the family until she was old enough to decide what it meant to her. I closed the folder and placed it back inside the cabinet. My daughter didn't know about the trust. Not because I had tried to hide it, but because she never asked about the legal details after her father passed. She had trusted that everything was simple, and I had let her believe that. But simple and true are not always the same thing. The following week moved quickly. Too quickly. Boxers filled the rooms. Old photographs, kitchen utensils, books, clothes I hadn't worn in years but couldn't bring myself to throw away. Every item carried a memory attached to it. The piano remained in the living room untouched. The movers said it would be the last thing they handled. My daughter arrived the night before closing with a folder of her own. Tomorrow is the big day, she said. Big day. That's what people call endings when they don't want them to sound sad. She sat across from me at the table again. You'll need to sign a few final documents in the morning, she explained. I nodded slowly. She smiled, relieved. I know this hasn't been easy, she said, but you'll see. A year from now you'll thank me. I didn't argue. Not because she was right, but because tomorrow would say everything that needed to be said. The next morning we drove to the title office together. The building was quiet and professional, filled with neutral colors and polite voices. The woman at the front desk welcomed us with a smile. Are you here for the Harrison closing? She asked. My daughter nodded proudly. Yes. We sat at a long conference table while papers were arranged neatly in front of us. The real estate agent arrived. Then the buyers, a young couple with excited eyes. They talked about paint colors and renovations while we waited. Finally, the closing agent entered the room carrying a stack of documents. All right, she said cheerfully. Let's finalize everything. She began explaining the paperwork, page after page, signature after signature. Then she reached the property transfer document. Mrs. Harrison, she said, sliding the paper toward me, I'll need your signature here. I looked down at the page. The pen felt heavy in my hand. My daughter watched me closely, encouraging, expecting. I placed the pen on the table instead. I can't sign this, I said calmly. The room went silent. My daughter blinked. What do you mean? She asked. I mean, I can't sell the house. Confusion spread across her face. Mom, we've been through this. The house is already under contract. Yes, I said. But it isn't mine to sell. The closing agent frowned slightly. Could you clarify that? I reached into my purse and pulled out the thin folder. the same one that had been in the cabinet for 15 years. I opened it and slid the document across the table. The agent read quietly for a moment. Then she read it again. Her eyebrows lifted. "Well," she said slowly, "this changes things." My daughter leaned forward. "What changes things?" The agent looked at her carefully. "The property is held in a trust." "I know that," my daughter said quickly. "My mom manages it." "Yes," the agent replied. "But according to this document, the trust requires approval from both listed beneficiaries before the property can be sold." My daughter frowned. "Okay, so?" The agent turned the page slightly so she could see the names. "The second beneficiary is your daughter, my granddaughter." The room felt very still. "She's 6 years old," my daughter said. "Yes," the agent replied gently. "And until she reaches the age specified in the trust." She paused before finishing the sentence. "This house cannot legally be sold." My daughter stared at the document as if it had suddenly appeared from another universe. "That's not possible," she whispered. But it was, and for the first time since the red sign appeared on the lawn, the house was quiet again. Because sometimes the person everyone thinks is powerless is the one who has been holding the final decision all along.